Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson using the Johnson edition. We are in poem 261, Put Up My Lute. Now, this is going to be a fascinating poem for us. In some ways, we're back to poem 250. You'll maybe recall just a little bit ago when she said, I shall keep singing, birds will pass me on their way to yellower climes, each with a robin's expectation. I with my red breast and my rhymes, late when I take my place in summer, but I shall bring a fuller tune. Vespers are sweeter than Martin's, Senor, morning only the seed of noon. And you'll remember that when we did that poem, we were talking about the confidence that she had that her poetry would be appreciated and understood. Here, we got a different poem. Here, we're going to see a certain amount of self-doubt as it relates to her poetic project. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of comments regarding the earlier poems, and we just finished with poem, in fact, 260. Now, this is a poem about poetry, but it's really a poem about the making of music and the acceptance of that music which is made. She'll say it this way. By the way, pay attention to all the exclamation points in this poem. Put up my lute, what of my music? Since the sole ear I cared to charm, passive as granite laps my music. Sobbing will suit as well as psalm. Would but the Memnon of the deserts teach me the strain that vanquished him when he surrendered to the sunrise. Maybe that would awaken then. Now, who the them is not clear. You could make the argument this is a poem about poetry, and Emily's questioning why it is that the publishers, or those she shared her poetry with, have not been so forthcoming or accepting of her poetry. Certainly it can work on that count. Let's also point out that she will reference here Memnon of the desert, the famous statue of the Ethiopian king, that when the sunrise hit the statue, it was purported to make music. There's some debate as to why, probably certain small holes when the wind blows through it and the like. Notice we'll begin first though with put up my lute. Now, why she's saying this and who she's saying this to, it isn't clear. It's possible that she's kind of maybe even channeling the voice of Prospero at the end of Tempest. You'll remember when ostensibly Shakespeare through Prospero seems to be suggesting, I'm done, I'm finished, that last poem of 1611, I'll lay down my pen and I'll be finished. We've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net if you want to run it to the ground. And then she'll ask, what of my music? And it's interesting, is it a question or is it a statement? Her poetry, by the way, the word lute gets used in poem 366 and 794. There it's dejected lute of 794. I'll let you run to ground. One of my music, notice it's not my poetry, since the sole ear I cared to charm. Lots of speculation on this. Many people believe we're talking Sam Boyle's here, as we've commented in earlier poems, who received a number of her poems and many of them decided not to support. Passive as granite laps my music. When we get to poem 872, you'll see this use of the word laps one more time. And then she'll use only one time in all of her poetry, and as I've said to you guys, so many of her poems seem to kind of be hinged around a single word. Here that word is sobbing, only used one time in here. Sobbing will suit as well as psalm. It is significant because, of course, the fact that she uses the word psalm immediately takes the readers of her day back to, of course, David in the book of Psalms, where David will often cry, Psalm 13, how long wilt thou forget me, O Lord, forever? How long will thou hide thy face from me? There is some of that tone, we might say, or voice, in a poem like this, where she says, you know, I might as well just put away my lute. I might as well just cry, sob, because that's about as useful as the poetry that I'm writing. Then there's this speculation. I wonder what would awaken them. Now, who the them is obviously speculating upon here as well. Would but the Memnon of the desert, and I can't help but By the way, Memnon is only mentioned one time in all her poetry. It's an abstract, a kind of strange reference here. She kind of assumes that readers will know who and what she's talking about. You have to be educated to know what she's talking about. Of the desert will take us to a set of lines by T.S. Eliot, that fifth passage of Burnt Norton. We'll maybe do that in a bit. Then she'll say, teach me. This teach me phrase will take us back to poem 177. Teach me the strain in this poem and the poem that follows. She'll use this word strain, that vanquished him when he surrendered to the sunrise. In other words, this idea that the statue of Memnon in the Ethiopian king, when the sun hits it at a certain time of the morning, it will sing because the wind will blow through the statue. Maybe, and that takes us back to poem 224 and her use of that word, that would awaken them. Now, as we've said from our study of Thoreau, we must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn that will not forsake us in our soundest sleep. It's interesting that right at this time, and we've given full lectures on Walden at learnstrong.net for those of you interested, that right at this time in American thought, Emerson and Thoreau and Walt Whitman and of course Emily, they love this notion that we have to wake up. Of course, for Emily, her longing is that somebody will read her poetry, her music, her lute playing, and will finally awaken to them. That is to say, waken who? Well, publishers, readers of her poetry. When we get to poem 617, we'll hear something very similar to this one. Don't put up my thread and needle, I'll begin to sew when the birds begin to whistle better stitches so. These were bent, my sight got crooked when the mind is plain. I'll do seams a queen's endeavor, would not blush to own. Hymns too fine for ladies tracing to the sightless knot, tucks of dainty interspersion like a dotted dot. Leave my needle in the furrow, where I put it down, I can make the zigzag stitches straight when I'm strong. Till then, dreaming I am sewing, fetch the seam I missed, closer sew I at my sleeping, still surmise my stitch. Here it's sewing in 261, it's singing, it's sobbing, of course, as well. Now, some have seen this as a little melodramatic, but I think that the point of this poem is that at 2a, it is hard when you feel rejected. At 2b, I love her word choice, especially of the word sobbing, which of course will take us to that word psalm. At 3a, well, obviously 617, but I can't help but think about these lines from T.S. Eliot's classic, Burnt Norton 5. We've given full lectures on all of this at learnstrong.net, and I very much recommend you run that to ground. I have said that I think that Eliot was very influenced by his study of Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson. Just hear this as he talks at the end of this little passage about the word in the desert and the chimera. Words move, music moves, only in time. But that which is only living can only die. Words, after speech, reach into the silence. Only by the form, the pattern, can words or music reach the stillness, as a Chinese jar still moves perpetually in its stillness. Not the stillness of the violin while the note lasts, not that only, but the coexistence, or say that the end precedes the beginning, and the end and the beginning were always there, before the beginning and after the end, and all is always now. Words strain, crack, and sometimes break under the burden, under the tension, slip, slide, perish, decay with imprecision, will not stay in place, will not stay still. Shrieking voices, scolding, mocking, or merely chattering, always assail them. The word in the desert is most attacked by voices of temptation, the crying shadow in the funeral dance, the loud lament of the disconsolate chimera. Finally, at 3b, how can you own a poem like this? Well, what was the time that you had to deal with rejection? When somebody you cared about was as hard as granite to try to impress them and they refused. Thank you.